Hi everyone. I think it's been about 2 years since I did my last video. And, over the last 2 years, I've really wanted to do more, but I didn't feel like I had a whole lot left to say. I did that ebook, and most of the videos I did were earlier on in my transition when I felt like there was a ton that I had learned that I could talk about that had helped me through kind of like the initial steps of transition. And that's often the hardest part. But over the last little while, I've really started to think that maybe I wanted to do another video, kind of like a look back at the last few years and what's changed and what it's like to be trans now 5 years into transition, completed my transition, I guess for all intents and purposes, and to just kind of talk about what that's like. So I wrote a few things down like I usually did for most of my other past videos. And I wanted to just kind of, I guess, run through my notes here. So the first thing I wanted to say is like to be completely transparent and upfront about my feelings is that being trans is still really difficult. Like it doesn't just go away. And I think maybe at the beginning of transition there can be a tendency to have like this wishful thinking like, oh, when I get on hormones, things will be better. When I get gender reassignment surgery, things will be better. When I am full-time, things will be better. And while things do get progressively better throughout that process, no single one step is like a magic bullet, and you will always be trans and you will always deal with the experience of being a trans person and having to have gone through transition and the difficulties associated with it and the difficulties associated with living the life of a trans person. What really changes, though, is I think your ability to understand it and to cope with it and to create a life around it that you can be happy in and with. And I think that's what I've really tried to do since I feel that I've, kind of over the last few years since I've kind of completed my transition. So looking back on it, the things that I think really were like the most transformational for me, kind of in terms of moving on and kind of feeling pride as a trans person, come from looking at the strength that it took for me to face it. And I look back at when I first came out, and that's a moment, that's like a touchstone in my life at this point. I look back on it and I say like, holy shit, that took guts. That took real guts. And that not only did it take guts, but it took a certain amount of self-worth to be able to stand up and say, this transition, this truth about who I am is more important to me than what you think or what society thinks or what anybody thinks. This is me and me standing up for what I need. And that can be a really terrifying thing. But it's something that I think I've continued to look back on as proof that I was capable of it. And it's made me, I think, more demanding in terms of taking charge of my life and not taking no for an answer and being okay with making other people uncomfortable to a certain extent. And that has been probably one of the most valuable things that I've taken from it that's continued to enrich my life going forward. The next thing so I just had some notes here that I want to talk about, some reflections, I guess. The next thing that I wrote down was that the pain of transition, like the really, really bad pain, not like the annoying pain or, the scary moments that you have to overcome, but the really deep, deep pain, it comes during a time when you feel hopeless. It's hopelessness, really. It's a feeling of stagnation and an abandonment of the idea that you control your own destiny. And I think the times when I felt like the most despair were the times when I lacked confidence in my own ability to affect change in my life. And that's something I never want to feel again. That's hell. Sorry, it's my puppy barking. The next thing that I wrote down here is that, I guess it's getting cliched at this point, but life gets better. The caveat to that is it gets better if you take the steps to make it better. It won't get better just by simply like floating. You need to make a concerted effort to overcome each and every specific obstacle in your way toward your goal. If you're not doing that, don't expect it to get better. You'll just stay in that same stagnated place, and it is hell. So it gets better, but only when you make it happen. The next thing is the world's changing, and it's changing really quickly. Even just 5 years ago when I first started transitioning, there were, I guess, more than a handful trans women that were kind of telling their stories on YouTube and in other social places online. But now it's like, it's massive. Like now it's gotten to the point where even if you wanted to watch every trans YouTuber, I don't think you could do it. And what's amazing about that is that it's almost guaranteed that if you look enough, you'll find someone that you really see yourself in, that you can identify with on a personal level. And when I was first transitioning, I was lucky enough to find a few people like that as well. And that made such a huge difference, right? Because it's not just about the inspiration of seeing them do what you want to do, but it's seeing yourself in them do what you want to do. And that's so incredibly powerful. It's like kind of fast forwarding your life in a way that, you couldn't just imagine it. You're seeing someone else accomplish the things that you want to accomplish, and they seem similar enough to you that you could see yourself doing it. That's crazy powerful. And that's why it's so important that trans people and really any person who goes through a unique life struggle, or really any life struggle, is open and honest about that struggle and is willing to share it in an intimate way with others. It's life-changing, really. So I just had a couple more. This one really has to do with if you're going through hell, there's one recommendation that I can give you that I think I've learned that maybe I've kind of refined over the last couple of years. Just as I've gotten towards the end of my transition and had the perspective of time to look back on it and think about that time in my life. And it's that there are some really, really amazing joys in transitioning, things that only trans people get to have, but are like way up there with some of the best moments you'll ever have in your life. And though there's a ton of pain and a lot of struggle and, so much awkwardness and craziness and weirdness and change, if you can step back for a minute and look at the positives and the fun and the joy of transitioning, and try and focus on that rather than the other, I think it's possible to exit your transition feeling like it was a more positive than negative experience, like on a whole. And maybe that's a privileged thing to say, because in a lot of ways I was very lucky with my transition. And some people certainly have, transitions that they probably can't say there were a lot of happy moments, but there are some universal ones. And a lot of it really just has to do with becoming the person that you always wanted to be, physically, and also in terms of how that's reflected back to you by other people. The first time that you're gendered correctly, the first time you get on hormones and you start to see changes that feel right for the first time. Every single one of those little things, cherish them while they're happening, because you'll miss it when it's over. I know that I do. Not that I don't, still get like a surge of pleasure when people say, yes, ma'am, or, you know, I get to live out mundane things in a body that actually feels comfortable to me now. That's all still like, that still generates a ton of happiness for me, but it's not like this acute type happiness that you have initially. So cherish that, and don't just gloss over it and focus only on the things that you find particularly painful about transition. Lastly, I guess I'll end it. I know it's getting long, 10 minutes now. It's something I've said in past videos, but it's worth repeating, and it's continue to be kind to yourself through this process. And afterwards, 5 years later, 10 years later, 50 years later, you have to deal with yourself for the rest of your life. And if you're constantly beating yourself over the head over the small mistakes and the things you don't get perfectly the way that you want them, it's going to just be hard. But you also have an opportunity to be kind to yourself, and to remember that you can forgive yourself for your mistakes, and that you're always going to be your worst critic, whether that's in terms of the way that you look or the progress that you're making in your transition or really anything else. Just be kind to yourself, okay? That made all the difference for me. And maybe I was a little too kind to myself sometimes, but it's better than the other way around. So I hope I can do some more videos at some point. I'll try and think of some more interesting things to say about the experiences that I've had. But I think this is a decent life update. So I hope this finds all of you guys well. And, I'd love to hear from you. Bye.